I feel like we are in the top 5 companies in the world that could go solve this particular problem. And that's a pretty rare position to be in, and not just build a $1 billion company, build $10 billion, $50 billion company that defines how this problem gets solved.
Every time you open an app, send a payment or book a flight, you're trusting thousands, if not millions, of invisible systems to just work. But what happens when they don't? It can be chaos. Flights grounded, salaries frozen, hospitals stalled, and these glitches, they can bring billion-dollar businesses to a halt in seconds. Today on the Founders and Builders podcast, I'm joined by Stephen Whitworth, co-founder and CEO of Incident.io, the company building the emergency response layer for the internet. Stephen actually saw the cracks firsthand at Monzo, which led him and his team, Chris and Pete, to co-found Incident, and they've now raised around $96 million from some top-tier investors like Index, Insight Partners, and also Point 9.
There's a few things that have to line up for people to build like really, really big and defining companies, and it's usually like...
As always, if you enjoyed this episode, don't forget to hit subscribe down below, and now let's get into it. If software is eating the world, our banks, our online sites where we shop, the hospitals we use, what happens when it fails?
The way I think of it is like software has become a lot more important over the last 20 years. And I've been working now for, getting on for like 12 or 13 of them. And we were reflecting on this the other day with, me and my co-founders, is that like really sort of the bar for like resiliency and reliability has really increased. Because I remember, I used to use like Lloyd's Bank for my bank, and they would just be it was just a fine thing to sort of turn the bank off for like 6 hours on the weekend or 12 hours on the weekend. And then if you look at companies like Stripe, Stripe just posted that they have done 5 nines of reliability. So they had something like 14 minutes of downtime an entire year. There's just such a vast difference between, turn the thing off for 6 hours every weekend to 5 nines of reliability. And I think that's mostly driven by like customer expectations.
Mm-hmm.
Because fundamentally, like, attention spans have dropped. Like, I try not to use TikTok very much. Like, my wife loves it. But like, if you think about the amount of time that you would look at a TikTok before switching to the next one, I think that is a general thing that's sort of applied to, products and to services and to businesses, which is like, it kind of has to deliver. Otherwise, we'll switch to the next one. And I think reliability and resilience is a big part of that. So kind of coming back to your original question is like, it fundamentally means that like you've got this kind of ever rising expectation against you, but really like the tools sort of haven't kept up with it. And what that means is for most modern organizations, like they're trying to sort of battle this like ever greater expectation, but really just a bunch of like manual process, kind of people stressing out in the middle of the night when stuff breaks. And in practice, it often looks like, some tool will kind of wake you up and tell you that there's a problem. But in reality, after that, it's a bit like headless chickens. You've got someone looking at some out-of-date document that tells them what to do. You've got, an email that you need to send to your most important customer, but, the person that's trying to find it forgot what their email was. There's sort of all of this manual stuff that ends up being kind of glued together by humans. And the net impact of that is, the expectation from customers has gone up. The way to respond to it, and the sort of amount of failure has gone up. The way to respond to it has stayed basically constant. And then as a result, like you get sort of more and more impacted, unhappier customers. So yeah, that was sort of the initial, like having been basically in software engineering for the last 12, 13 years, like this is essentially my 4th job at this point. And as a result, I'd kind of experienced this. I've been on call at pretty much every role that I've been at. And as a result, it was like, okay, enough. Like this is the time to sort of go build something, go do something about it. So yes, it's been an interesting journey. And I think ultimately, like, it's kind of just getting worse for businesses. So that's why we just started to build a company around it.
So that's how Incident started. But for folks that are maybe not so familiar with the space, I'd just love to like bring a couple of stats.
Sure.
I think it was July 2024, if I'm not wrong. There was a CrowdStrike update that basically downed like 8.5 million Windows machines, disrupted airlines, hospitals, banks, government services. And I think the net cost was about $10 billion. What on the inside happens when, and we saw it recently as well in July last month, I think there was a Google Cloud outage, which most of the apps like OpenAI, Spotify, Discord are all built on top of, powers like 15% of the internet. What happens when those systems go down?
Yeah, I think the CrowdStrike one, I would say 10 billion seems cheap. You know, there's just so much knock-on impact that I would expect it to be much more than that. You might ask, like, why does this seem worse than it was, 10, 20, 30 years ago? And I think the answer is yes. And the thing that is driving that is like increased centralization of, large large technology services and players. So if you think about that, like if you think about the cloud provider market, you really do just have like AWS, Azure, Google, and like maybe Oracle, and that's it. So if you don't, if they aren't working, then, that is a huge amount of the internet's capacity, just a compute that isn't working. If you then apply that to say like CDNs, or like,
CDNs?
yeah, so like content delivery networks. So if you think about companies like Cloudflare or Fastly or Akamai, so these are places that sit in front of websites or services and essentially protect them from, bad actors on the internet, from, DDoS attacks and things like that. They actually also run about 80% of the world's internet traffic. And that just really wasn't the case, 30, 40 years ago. So I think when these things fail, you end up with, it doesn't take a lot. Essentially, you can get a huge impact from just one or two people failing, as opposed to, a long time ago, you could have had, it wasn't so centralized and it didn't have such a big impact. And ultimately, like, I think there's sort of two schools of thought on this. There's the kind of, if GitHub is down, it's a bit of a snow day, at school, where it's like, well, actually,
I enjoyed snow days at school.
Snow days were great, not necessarily productive, but they were great. I think fundamentally there's a school of thought which is like, it's kind of unreasonable to expect that all software has to work in all conditions, because you kind of want to be able to build on these tools like GitHub or AWS or Stripe or something like that. And it injects a lot of extra complexity if you have to assume that like Stripe isn't going to be working, so I have to have a backup provider. So honestly, just a lot of organizations don't do it, and they take the pain of something like a GCP going down, because they're like, actually the likelihood of that going wrong is less than the cost it would of complexity and the amount of time it would take me to build new product if I introduce that. The second school of thought is like, you own your uptime is your own uptime, and as a result, your customers don't care about what you're using under the hood, and it's your job, even when stuff is burning all around you, to be the sort of like, the calm in the fire. So as a result, it ends up being this sort of, I think, two schools of thought. Essentially, I'm sympathetic to both of them. And then what happens in practice is that, I think, push comes to shove, I think most businesses are in the first camp, which is, we're going to architect our business around a small number of really, really important centralized providers. And if they fail, we're going to try our best to sort of navigate that, but we really just sort of have to sit it out and wait the worst. And then I guess maybe there is a bit of comfort in the, like, if you're not working, but also Spotify and GitHub and Uber and all of these other companies aren't working, then that maybe makes you feel like some of the payment is not being deflected. That's a little different for us, because our job is to tell people when things go wrong and help them navigate the stresses of that. So we have this kind of like, who will watch the watchers problem, where it's like, we have to be working when everyone else is failing. So yeah, I think ultimately,
Yeah, there will be some irony if incident went down.
You can think about our product as like, yes, intuitive, simple, nice to use, but like, there's actually just a fundamental base of like resiliency, uptime that has to be there. Is, similar to Stripe, I would say, which is, it can have the nicest APIs and the best developer experience for building against it, but if it works, only 90% of the time, can't build a business on top of it. So yeah, it's sort of something we also have to take seriously. But many other businesses, like I was saying earlier, it's like Uber has to always be working for you to treat it and trust it as like the way that you get around cities and around the world. So as a result, you sort of have to, you basically always have to keep improving uptime and resiliency, which is just fundamentally tough.
And this is the world that you've built Incident within. So the audience is mainly, people are either starting their own business, already are running their own business, or maybe are looking in the future to do the same or investing in businesses. So through that lens, I'd love to go all the way back to the start of Incident when I think it was you, Chris, and Pete, you met in Monzo.
Yeah, absolutely. So our backgrounds is sort of like all of us are engineers in various forms. Me and Pete were more sort of, I guess, focused on, the product side of the world, whereas Chris ran, platform and infrastructure teams. And those teams are usually focused on building things that other developers inside organizations can use to, build more resiliently or build faster. And, you can think of me and Pete as being kind of consumers of what Chris would have built. Chris, and as a result, Chris would have been the kind of default owner of reliability, resiliency. And he was at Monzo, and me and Pete kind of worked in the same area, and we had always been the people that were on call for various services and systems. So, you know, Pete was working at GoCardless for 7 years, I think, before then. And that's, payments provider, has to work, high resiliency. And I was working at a fraud detection company. So as a result, it's like, well, you have to be up and you have to be quick. So the kind of way that it started was that, we had this ingrained thought in our mind that these tools are not cutting it for what we need. And we are having to do this like incredibly stressful work extremely manually, and that looked like something wakes me up to tell me that something's gone wrong. And then I'm sort of pushed to the front of the stage to deal with this stressful problem that's losing tens of thousands of dollars a minute with essentially no other software to help me. So that was the precursor. We then landed at Monzo. Chris had built amazing internal tooling at Monzo. They then open sourced it and kind of gave it to the world, and a bunch of other people and companies picked it up and thought it was great. And it was the kind of combination of, well, hey, we know this has sort of sucked for us at multiple companies before this. Chris's thing, which he built, I think he snuck away from his kids' swimming lessons, on the side, just like typing and building it. It's like, if this is much better than what we could buy on the open market with Chris's sort of evenings and weekends, and then eventually a few other people at Monzo, like imagine, the hypothesis is then, well, we would buy it. I wonder how many other people in the world would buy it, and imagine how much better it could be if you put time and energy and investment into doing it. So we started it as like a sort of a bit of a side hustle with the blessing, of some of the folks at Monzo. And then it ended up kind of launching. We put it on Twitter, and it got, like 500, I think it was 500 or 600 people on the first day were like, I want a demo of this thing. Like, let me know when I can see it. So we were then like, oh, okay, I think that our initial hypothesis of like, this would have been useful for us, seems useful for Monzo. I reckon the rest of the world has a similar problem. Kind of got proved out, and then, handed in our notice, started building as fast as we could, and then, four and a bit years from then until now.
So rumor has it you guys started not in a WeWork, but in a fire station that you painted yourself.
Yes. So so there's a Oaxaca that's between Old Street and sort of Shoreditch High Street in London. We were in a very small office that was sort of above that Oaxaca. And yeah, it was kind of an interesting time because, we'd saw this initial traction whilst we were at Monzo. And then as a result, there was like, product market fit feels like the external world like pulling stuff out of you and demanding things and more time and more features and more customers. And as a result, you're sort of getting dragged into this business that we'd sort of didn't know that it was going to work from when we launched it, and then sort of winding our time down at Monzo. And as a result, like we were kind of grappling for every hour that we could to work on the business. It was a bit of like a blessing in disguise, honestly, that we were building this still during lockdowns in COVID. So this would have been July. So we started building in like December 2020. Then we launched in January 2021, and then we were full-time June 2021. And then there was sort of a 3-month period where we were trying to step stuff down. And I remember sort of, we had this office for, I think it was like £750 a month. It was, 2 rooms on a fourth floor walk up. We had to like, had one room, which we then kind of painted and, put our first logo up and stuff, the kitchen, and then the toilet was at the back of the kitchen. So like you sort of had to walk through this tiny kitchen. And yeah, the way like we reminisce about it a lot because we were just signing up our first customers for £500 a month, £1,000 a month, £50 a month.
Yeah.
And like, if you sign someone up for, you know, for an annual plan of £500 a month, that's £6,000. So it's like, oh my God,
Now we are cooking.
yeah, it's like we just bought ourselves all of the MacBooks we needed and we've covered the rent at the office for, 8 months. And it's sort of the early days that meant that we started to get some momentum. We then, because we were getting more momentum, we then faced a decision of like, okay, do we want to do it as we're doing it, which is sort of scrap our way forward with incremental money that we get from customers, and like bootstrap versus VC is like this sort of religious debate that like we can spend some time on if you want, but it was basically there's money, we can pay for the things we need. Do we want to go and like actually raise a much bigger round and take the venture back to root and all of that stuff? But yes, Fire Station, unglamorous start, but it was nice in that it gave us a real sort of appreciation for what each incremental customer gave us, which was a MacBook, a plant in the corner of the office. Like,
oh, you guys have plants.
We had plants. We went down to the there's a market, and well, there's a person in Spitalfields Market, or a shop. I think it's at the it's sort of at like the RBS entrance to Spitalfields Market, where they just have tons of plants. So I remember like me and Pete walked down one day because it was like a 10-15 minute walk, and then we just bought loads of plants. But it was a really windy day, and I think they're like banana leaf plants, or like these plants that have massive sort of leaves. And as a result, I'd essentially just bought like a sale, and I was sort of like trying to like walk back whilst having all this stuff, blowing out of my arms. But I was, yeah, I think, everyone sort of always reminisces, I think, fondly of like earlier times, but you have to remember that like you will also be, in 2 years, we will be reminiscing about this time. So there's a bit of like, yes, the early days were great in some ways, but they were also very hard in other ways. So trying to sort of keep that balance.
And I think for a lot of founders that are sharing what they've been working on for the first time, there's a reality around getting in front of customers and doing live demos. Could you take us to a point? I think there was a story around you and Go Cardless in the early days that actually, you had to kind of hot patch in SQL behind the scenes. Like, what is the reality of getting the first version of Incident out into the world?
Oh yeah, that was a good find. So we benefited from the fact that we were essentially our own buyers of our product, which gives you this sort of taste and intuition for solving a problem. But it also, and it means that you can just like, what you have to build, and you're always frustrated by what you haven't built. But it also means that you kind of know how your product will probably be received on the other end, which is useful because we then started immediately doing demos to sort of people that kind of looked like us at companies that looked like Monzo, basically. And one of those was Go Cardless. And we obviously had like close relationships here. So we had Pete, who was from there, like co-founder, CTO, been there for 7 years. And then we like our first engineers also came from Go Cardless, and they sort of hadn't joined at this point. So this was me and Pete. I think Chris was there, but me and Pete had more days off Monzo than Chris had at this point. So I think it was just me and Pete. And we did this like little dual demo setup. So the way that we would demo our product is we create this fake Slack workspace. We then install our product into it. And then me and Pete would simulate an incident. So Pete would be leading it, and then I would be like someone else that's in the incident pretending to like debug and investigate things and type stuff in. And I can't remember if it was me or Pete leading it. I think it might have been Pete because of his relationship. He, it was like there was maybe 30, 40 engineers on the call taking a look, and he's sort of confidently like, right, incident is this thing, you use it to declare and manage incidents and stop them happening in future. So if I go ahead and declare a new incident, like we can then jump straight into things. And he types like, incident slash incident, the database is down. And I think at that point, like, just nothing happens. Uh, and I think like sort of wise things to remember is like, you're the most stressed person about it. The person on the other end of the line, they're thinking about what they're going to eat for lunch. They're worrying about like the latest pull request. Is someone reviewing my code? They don't care anywhere near as much about you. I think in the background, I was sort of frantically, because we just introduced this like new feature and it obviously wasn't working.
It was the roles and permissioning or something.
Yes, I think you're right. And like, as a result, I was in the background, like literally just hand typing SQL. And, we didn't have LLMs in these days. This is just a artisanally baked SQL that I was running in, production.
Did you actually write code?
I did. I haven't, like, we can talk about it a bit later, but like, I haven't written code in quite a few years, like proper production code. But anyway, we can get back to Claude Code and all that fun stuff. So I was like in the background, writing SQL to try and fix things. And I think it was probably like 1 to 2 minutes of just like stalling and like talking about other things the incident can do, and how
seems that we're having a bit of an incident.
Yeah, exactly. So I think the long and short is, if I had to try and take, some learnings out of that embarrassing situation, it's like, one, you're the most stressed person about it. So probably just chill. Like, if you just confidently navigate a live demo and act like nothing's wrong, you'll probably be fine. And then second is that, fundamentally, people realize that they're working with early stage technology companies. It's very hard for you to pretend that you aren't this like 2-bit company with 2 people that are working 2 days a week. Like, just accept it. Most people are backing like your vision and the velocity that you will take to go solve this problem. So they are fundamentally betting on you, not your product, because they're betting on your product in a year to 3 years from now, and they want to join you on that journey. So as a result, it's like, just don't be embarrassed by what you've built, because fundamentally most of your early customers are going to take half the bet on the product and half the bet on you. And that just stayed true. I mean, it's still honestly true today. We're less of a 2-bit company like now. But there's still a very much a sizing up from our largest customers, are like, is this like the leadership team that I want to put my weight and energy behind? So I was sort of surprised by like how consistent that's been since like day 0 to, day 1265 or something.
And since you, Chris, and Pete started this, let's say 5 years ago, take us to where you are now. Like, how do you measure success for incident? Is it, the number of resolved issues that your customers are able to work with? Is it the number of requests made to those systems to give you a size of scale of the kind of output and impact you're having? How do you think about that?
Yeah, good question. We do not have like one single metric in the sort of like, Instagram, it's like in, hours, like engagement or something like that. We never really ran sort of like product to any kind of metrics. So if you look at like my like leadership dashboard that I look at every week, there's like 8 things about go to market on there, and there's like 2 things about product. And so if I think about, ways in which I think we're being successful, and I had to pick like 1 or 2 metrics to determine that, one would be net dollar retention, which is essentially, if I take a cohort of customers in year 1, and then I take that same group of customers in year 2, like, and you take, you include the people that have left you, but also people that are spending more money, like, how much bigger or smaller is that pie than it was the previous year? And that, I think, gives you a really, really healthy, without diving deeper into the product, gives you a really healthy understanding of like, are you someone that your customers want to bet on back? And that will fundamentally find its way through to dollars at some point, because like they have to get their wallets out and do that. And for us, like, that's always been a really strong metric, and that's mostly influenced by people either using more of our product, which is a good proxy for value, or they're using other products, which is a good proxy for like value, but also trust and kind of getting on board with us.
I would imagine that, once an infra team or a platform engineer has used Incident once, when they land in their next company, it's like, where has this been all along?
Yeah, 100%. And like, Monzo for a very long time, I think, grew 5% every week, essentially based off of word of mouth. And like, that was a incredibly powerful incredibly powerful mechanic and is essentially the healthiest way to grow.
Mm.
Or sorry, it's the way to grow that is like most correlated with you, I think, having a really strong product,
Mm.
because people are like, oh my God, this thing is so good. I need to tell someone about it, or I need to take it with me. So it kind of goes in your tool belt and your arsenal. And I think that was something that we wanted to, we always did like this sort of cheeky phrase, which is like, so good, you'll break things on purpose. And
Mm.
like, we're very aware of the fact that like, we're not someone's daily driver user. So we're not like a Figma where I turn up as a designer, I do 9 hours and work a Figma a day, and
Mm.
then I shut my laptop. We are a thing that you would use when stuff goes wrong, is
Right.
innately stressful. So we kind of like, I guess if we go back to the previous question, like we would think about our success probably as like monthly active users of our product
Mm.
organization, not daily active users. Because if every person is using it every day, then that means that something is probably like very stressful at your organization. Um, and yeah, it's kind of it, that is like a really big, like still like a big lever of our growth is people, people going and taking us with us to new companies. And yeah, it ends up being very powerful, but I just don't think you can hack it. You have to build a product that makes people feel like they need to take it with them, to new companies. And I think Monzo nailed that in the early days. I think like we've done a good job. We still have like some way to go. But fundamentally, it's yeah, it's like the healthiest way to do it, because you can then have customers, share case studies and videos, and they want to talk on, we have a conference, Sev Zero, like people want to come and talk there. So I,
Monzo was known back in the day for opening its offices quite a lot, to have people come in, give feedback. What did they love about the product? Have you guys taken advantage of that in the incident as well in London?
yeah, I mean, this was how so I knew some of the early engineers at Monzo because I'd worked with them at a company called Halo. So I think I'm like, I don't know, I think I'm like user number like 26 or something of Monzo. Just like, it's a very small flex, but I thought I'd throw it in there. But as a result, like that, the kind of more important point is that like, I think we took a lot of learnings from how that company operated, also things around transparency internally, and sort of brought them with us. Um, and like, I still do it to this day. Like if I ever see someone that's signed up for our product,
Mm.
I will go and add them on LinkedIn, and I'll just pop them a note. It's like, please tell me everything that you think sucks about the product so we can like know and improve it. Because building great product to me is like, it's much more of an art than a science.
Mm.
It's much more around like how it feels to use. And, if Monzo influenced us, like Linear influenced us a lot as a company, of like, it is fundamentally about, things that cannot be sort of described or boiled down into A/B tests or anything like that.
Mm.
It's judgment and like the tactile nature of products, and does this thing suggest things at the right time to me, and are they correct, or does it feel stupid or clunky? Does it take 5 seconds to do anything? And as a result, like, yeah, we sort of brought a lot of that mechanic with us here.
Mm.
And in terms of kind of actually getting people's feedback, in person and on calls, the way that I like to think about it is like, we tried to build a really revenue focused product team
Mm.
and a really product focused revenue team, with the idea being that like, you know, you're going to get if, sales and CS are like the tip of the spear when it comes to, if sales that are dealing with prospects are mostly going to give you feedback that is the kind of the people that might use your product but don't use it yet.
Mm.
And then CS, customer success here and support are going to give you feedback for those that use but want to stretch your product even further. It's really important that you get enough of both of these things.
Yep.
So the way that we've done that in practice is try and put engineers really close to deals with customers, both new and existing customers, so they can get a sense for both how hard a salesperson's job is, so they build empathy. But second, what do people actually use this on the ground for? And like, sort of avoid that the ivory tower nature of like, we use our own product like this, but it turns out, everyone's using it totally different in reality. And then you can supplement that with technology. So we use Gong a lot internally, which means that we then have a lot of actual feedback and transcripts and text data about how people are using our product. And like, again, uh, we've sort of gone reasonably far without like delving into AI, but like there's a huge amount that you can do there, which is then around taking that text data and sort of aggregating it and understanding things through that. So we use tools like Source as well, which are like product kind of making sense of Salesforce data, Gong data, Slack data to try and get a sense of what do customers actually want and how do they group that? Is that disproportionately large customers or smaller customers? But you can then also do really cool things like understand things about competitors. So what competitors really, really strong at, and that comes straight from the voice of a customer on a Gong call, not like a, you know, an engineer to a product manager to an aggregated Notion document to a 2-week out of date exec report to a sort of, CEO. It's like, no, I just would like to collapse as much as possible. Yeah, all of the communication trails between all of these things. So yes, Monzo influenced us a lot from a kind of be close to people, but then so you can sort of try and do that in multiple different ways, some of which are like a bit more impersonal, but like, through technology. And then there's a bunch of other stuff which is like you just can't replace talking to someone and have them, smile or look frustrated or whatever about your product as well.
Yeah. And you mentioned competition, so I'd love to like delve into this a little bit. You were building not in a complete white space, right? In many ways, Incident was creating software that is truly a delight for people to use and understanding the workflows that they need to take off the back of this kind of system of record of what the incident is. There were huge enterprise companies, and there still are, like PagerDuty in there. How did you think about which small, high-impact piece of the problem to solve first, and how did you get to that conclusion?
Yes, I think it's very easy to look smart in hindsight and look very, incredibly strategic and talk about things like they were sort of like, this was the precise wedge that we would land with and then we would expand. I think, ultimately, I would say that we were not as clever as that, and we honestly just built the tool that we wanted to use. And, it kind of goes back to the story about Chris, right? Which is like, he's frustrated enough that he is not going to like watch his kid do their swimming lessons. He's going to sit there building a tool that he needs for his job. And what this looked like in reality was, tools like PagerDuty or Opsgenie would wake you up and tell you there's a problem, and then sort of ... question mark. And that was really the pain that Chris was feeling, was like, I need to build something that will help me get the right people in the room when things go wrong, because now Monzo's growing. There's there's something that's broken over here that is only in our payment systems. There's some parts of sign up that are broken, but that's nothing to do with payments. So I need to get the right person and not waste time on, valuable time that you could be building on distracting the wrong people. Some of these things are really bad. So we need to coordinate, groups of people. And that isn't just engineers, that's execs, that's, legal support, compliance, all of that fun stuff. And fundamentally, like, that sucked. We want to stop it happening again. So I want to build something that enables us to learn from things going wrong so we can stop doing that. So that was like primarily the motivation is like just build something that does that. And that meant that you ended up with this, this kind of life cycle where we would arrive sort of at the point at which that someone knew there was a problem. Which means that we were kind of in this like frenemies situation with PagerDuty, which was, they'll wake you up and then we'll take things over from there. And ultimately that gave us a really nice wedge into the problem, because then that meant that we had a lot of data about who did what in an incident and what actions did people take. And was this a really bad incident? Was it not? And then from that point, we were like, okay, well, people are still using many different products. So they're using, a status page tool to tell their customers about it. They're still using tools like PagerDuty and Opsgenie. And as a result, we then rapidly built out multiple new products. So yes, I would describe this as sort of like greenfield from a, helping people solve incidents problem, because we're mostly coming up against just manual process and nobody has tools for that. And then it's very much a competition against tools like PagerDuty and Opsgenie for the wake you up side of the world. So yeah, it ends up being this like hybrid of, because now we have multiple products and we can sell them. It's like, well, do we just want to do replacements of those existing tools and get in and then sell later? Do we want to sort of do it the old way and like land with just the thing and keep the same thing going? So it's been interesting. I think like honestly, just having like more moves and degrees of freedom has meant that you can just be a bit more nimble with that stuff. So Yeah, I would summarize by saying it looked like a smart strategy in hindsight. I'd say in reality it was not strategy backwards into product. It was what I need to solve my issue forwards, which then meant that like, okay, well actually now that we're here and we're seeing traction, what other problems have we earned the right to go solve for our
Mhm.
customers? So that's where we sort of ended up.
Super, super quick one from me. As you know, every episode, we ask our listeners what is one tool that they couldn't live without. Now, this week, it's 11 Labs. 11 Labs is building the voice and audio layer for the internet, making sure that content is understood by everyone, everywhere. They started out by bringing the best text-to-speech engines, which is where you probably have heard them from. But recently, they've also moved into voice cloning and I think even music generation. It's already been used in audiobooks, games, and probably some of the films that you've watched. And all of the engineers that I've worked with have used 11 Labs to build out their voice apps. So if you're interested, check out the link in the description below to learn more. And for now, let's get back into the episode. And outside of just the first version of the product that you built, if you think about of all the decisions that you've made in Incident, not just you, but let's say you, Chris, and Pete, let's start there. What are the maybe 10% of decisions you made that drove 90% of the success that you think you've seen today?
Yeah, great question. I would go back to the like building a really revenue focused product team and building a product focused revenue team. Because what that has meant is that we've been able to keep a level of like customer centricity as we've grown, and that has not got like translated away. And as a result, like at our best, and I still think we have improvement to do here, we can be hyper responsive to customers, and we can empathize with them in a way that is hard for others to do. Because if we're selling to engineers and we have engineers with them speaking to them, there's a like kind of cheat code here and a shared language that I think is just sort of harder for our competitors to do. So that's something that our customers like deeply deeply value.
Mm.
Second is like probably ruthlessly dog fooding our own product, which means that like we end up shaving away lots and lots of rough edges of the product. Yes, because of customer feedback, but also because of our own annoyance with it. It's like, this sucks, turn it off. It's like, okay, well, we should turn it off for customers as well. Like we don't let ourselves run, you know, we don't let ourselves drift far from like what we would give for customers versus what we run internally.
Mhm.
And that also means that like you can actually use Incident for really cool customer support use cases. So you can take an alert from something going wrong, which has, a particular organization or company that's affected. And then you can use our product to attach that customer being affected to this incident. And if we know who the customer is in Salesforce, well, we also know who their, customer success manager is. So as a result, we use our product both to shave the rough edges off of things, but also to like power great support experiences. I would say we are the first best user of our own product. We're obviously not the size of someone like Netflix, so it's hard to simulate that usage. We try and empathize definitely as best as we can. But I think if you build those two things, like a GTM and a product org that have deep empathy and appreciation for each other, and sort of win together on these deals, and then you build this tool where you're like the first best user of it. I just feel like if you do those two things, yes, you have to get some of the strategy right and all the other stuff, but like you've got such a strong base that you can then like be resilient to any kind of shocks, changes that come on your way, and you can navigate and twist and turn. So those are probably like the two things. And that like I didn't, I was sort of like, negging myself a bit and being like the initial wedge wasn't really too much of a conscious thing. Like these two things were incredibly conscious. It was like we sat down, we thought like, how do we want to do this? How do we want to build it? So they ended up paying off, I think, in the long run. And like, I will sort of treasure them as we grow the company. We were very stubborn about people saying things like, yeah, but that will never scale. I'm like, watch me. It's like, well, we will do it until it breaks, and then when it breaks, we will do some version that is close as we can possibly get to it.
Yeah. And so dogfooding your own product and keeping sales and product/eng super close. What if I ask you the inverse of that? So what are the, let's say, 10% of the decisions that you folks made that drove 90% of the pain?
Yes. I think honestly it just comes down to hiring, and like hiring is just it's just the thing that like every founder or person building a company will empathize
Mm,
as a sort of irreducibly hard and complex problem. There's things that you can do to reduce risk of hires that don't fit, or that
mm,
take you in the wrong direction or aren't the right fit for that part of the journey. But it's just really, really hard to know that
mm,
from first principles and from little experience of doing it. So I think, if I think about our journey, like we were three product minded engineers, and we'd sort of sold some of the software in the early days. Chris used to sort of pace up and down the hallways of his house, like, with his palms sweating before the first demos that he did because he was so nervous. And I think that gives you sort of an appreciation of like how new and novel some of these problems were that we were dealing with at the start.
mm,
But even if you sell your product, that's incredibly different to building a scaled go-to-market machine. You are essentially building a machine that delivers deals. You are not whereas if you sell things, you're delivering deals yourself. Um, so I think that was just really, really tough for us to navigate. Is just to really understand like what do we actually need for this specific part of the journey, and how rapidly is what we need changing through this month, this quarter, this year.
mhm,
And I think that like, so if we go back to like the earlier stages of the company, we had proven that we could repeatedly sell things to customers, and we had then proven that we could hire a couple of reps that could
mhm,
repeatedly sell things to customers. And then it's like, well, what else do we need to see here? Like, we now need to grow this thing. And I think then at that point, we didn't realize sort of how quickly the mechanics shift. So you then need to be introducing like qualification criteria, like deal reviews, pipe reviews, BDR pods, and with AEs, there's a lot of complexity where, all of the skills that you've acquired
mm,
about how to sell your product are not that useful in any of the kind of mechanics of building things. And as a result, like that meant that, I think that as we were navigating like hiring along the way, it was just really tough to know. I don't think we necessarily knew what we needed at
mm,
any given time because uh, we just hadn't really done it before. And
mm,
I think you sort of have to probably just have to burn your fingers a little bit and
mm,
try it and see something and then learn from it. I reflect on like, would I have made different decisions with the information that I knew then? Because it's very easy to sort of look back with hindsight, and I just think it would be hard to say.
mm,
It would be hard to say that any of sort of the hiring that we did, would have necessarily like changed that much. And the people that we hired were like still valuable and impacted the company.
mm.
It was more just it's tough to know like deeply what you need for what point of the company. And I think, we still probably struggle with it for like many of the things that we've not hired before here yet. So we're still probably messing it up a bit.
Yeah.
So, but yeah, disproportionately painful.
Well, of course, there seems to be like you don't know what you don't know.
Yes.
What, given that you've kind of, I don't want to say fallen prey to these blind spots, but I think it's just a natural like byproduct of building something.
Mhm.
How do you think you can use the people around you, knowing what you know now? I'm thinking investors, board advisors, people that are in your network that have maybe been there and done that before. Have you kind of changed the way you think about leveraging the people that maybe, have that hands-on experience?
Yes. So like we sort of did and do use them, and like they're like very helpful. But like the thing you have to appreciate is that you have so much context and
Mm,
people. So if you, for example, if you take a board member, like, if they decide to be like reasonably uninvolved with the company,
mm,
they might just see a board update every, you know, 3 months at a board meeting and like snippets of little chats here and there. If they decide to get really involved, maybe
mm,
talking every couple of weeks, that is still no substitute for like understanding you know, what is the level of detail that this person goes into when they're, presenting a marketing plan? What is the level of like kind of how do they manage their managers? Like those sorts of people don't really know as deeply as you will have a sense for. So I always think about it as like you have to know what they're most useful for, which is like common patterns that have repeated throughout history. And through which like it's the sort of emotional intelligence. It's like you've sort of seen a thing over here and that smells quite a lot like this thing that has repeatedly happened, this problem that repeatedly happens, 1 to 3 to 6 months away. I think outside outside views can be very good at that.
Mm-hmm.
Um, I don't think they have enough context to be very deep on like, for example, like, is this person great for this phase of the business, but is failing to scale into the next leader for like the next 5x of the business. And
Mm-hmm.
as a result, they should still stay with the business, but we should hire someone to go in and sort of run things and
Mm.
report to them. They're just not going to have anywhere near enough context to like help you make that decision. So I would say lean on people that have seen common patterns, which are usually investors, advisors, people that have done this for a long time. They know a lot, especially about the sort of, if I go back to my previous example of like things that were very unique to your company at the start is like selling to the persona, the pain point, the product. Do you know that deeply? Things that are not unique to your company is sales compensation plans and BDR and AE pods and like how to structure, a scaled support, follow the sun support model. It's like these are known things to do. So you kind of know what you're good at and then like lean on others for that side of the world. But then you're paid to make decisions and to make good decisions. And yeah, the phrase we use is like, don't outsource your conviction.
Mm.
Like, build independent conviction on the path and don't sort of do something because someone else told you so,
Mm.
or like hire someone because someone else told you so, because you're paid to be accountable for this stuff. So you have to wear both the benefits and the pain of that. So
And nobody else needs to deal with the consequences as greatly or for as long as you do.
yeah, 100%. That's a fundamentally different job from being an engineer or an engineering manager at a company, which like
Yeah.
often many founders have come from like either IC or sort of like manager, like maybe second line manager roles where like, yes, you're kind of like, there is some level of accountability, and it is not ultimate accountability, and like, even if someone else messed up, it's you have to own it and eat the situation and sort of all the problems that come with it. So that's like a very definite switch, I think, from, you know, oh yeah, we get this thing wrong, then we'll survive. It's like, no, it might literally set the company back by like 12 to 24 months. So you really need to get this decision right.
Yeah.
It's very different from probably what you faced if you're working at, Stripe or, all of the like McKinsey or all of these sorts of companies before you go start a company. So you sort of have to, it's an immediate shift up in like accountability and like the impact and like the knock-on impact of decisions you make.
Mm-hmm. You said at the minute, like maybe 80% of your time is focused on sales, marketing, go-to-market related stuff for Incident. But of course, that's not your background. So maybe the question is, how do you approach this knowing enough to understand when might be the right time to bring somebody in to lead that function? How do you think about, as the CEO that basically has accountability for the whole business, but also more context more broadly than everyone else? When is the right time to partner with that lead for the new, department within Incident?
Yeah, I think it depends on what your strengths are. So for example, like my co-founder Pete like is very strong at product and engineering and running those organizations. And as a result, it's like I could probably do some of it, but like he's so strong at that like I don't feel the need to go spend my time there. And also Chris has an amazing eye for details and product and all of that side of the world. So like we shouldn't triple up on one area because like we're building a sort of much wider business here. And as a result, I'd say I'd spend my time between, we're doing a lot of hiring at the moment. So working closely with like, both recruiters on our side, but also like kind of building a kind of brand that people want to, like a company and a brand that people want to be associated with. And then working closely with our CMO on, things like our conference or, taking big bets on like new segments of customers that we want to go after. So working closely with like, go-to-market leaders on building that stuff out. I think the shift that I had to make is fundamentally from a person that gets their like dopamine, you know, dopamine loop or serotonin, can't remember which one it is. It's like, it's sort of feedback loop of I'm valuable, I did a thing, is not on the level of like an individual task or like a ticket. If you were an engineer, is now much wider, sort of longer feedback loop. And I've sort of become much more comfortable with that because, for example, if we go back to I've sold something, I've hired some reps that have sold something. I sort of the next logical step is like hire someone that can like build out that machine. I think the rubric I use is like I should never be running anything long term, but I can control the amount to which I'm involved with everything. It's like there should be someone that's notionally responsible for every important part of the business that is not me, because there's things that only I can do as the CEO, which is like overall bar for quality at the company, set strategic vision and direction for the next 6 months, 12 months, 24 months, and be the kind of like figurehead and beacon for the company. And it's like, that's a job. That's more than a full-time job. So do I want to go layer that on with running 4 other functions independently? So yes, the way I've done it in practice is, so for example, I ran sales for a large portion of last year, was like, be close enough to know the specific type of person that would do really well in this role. And you can't really do that in any other way than getting close to the metal on like, this part of our business is very like fast and velocity based. So as a result, we need someone that can like, optimize and like try and close sales cycles down and get in early and expand. And then, we're not doing like multi-million-dollar enterprise deals. So I don't need this person. Like that's much easier to understand when you're closer, but then like rapidly hire out and sort of get someone to own that and work closely with them. And then, if and then try and do that for some other area and then spin it off and grab someone else to go do it. But you also end up with like, some people leave, some people don't work out. So there will also be a world where I imagine like I have to dip into things in future for which I'm just like not qualified to do, but it's your job is to sort of do the best, do the best thing for the company. So as a result, like, yeah, I try and, make sure that there's someone owning every important thing, but that doesn't mean I'm uninvolved or I'm doing the like, everything is at a distance and I only work with my team. I try and like zone in on particular parts of the org chart.
Yeah.
And I'm like, for example, like we've launched, a product called AI SRE that's like very strategically important for the company. It's like, I'm going to be really close with that team and their work, but also the GTM team that's helping support with that. But then I also really care about like, for example, like all of the reps that we've hired and how they're onboarding and ramping. So I sort of went from a model where it's like I needed to be involved in a specific function, but then not that involved in many other functions because it was taking up too much of my time to try and hire people to lead all of these things and then pick like, I'm literally looking at like the high bob chart in my mind where you just like drag the sort of cut over of like, okay, where do I need to spend more time and like kind of where is that important? And that means that you can sort of balance both staying in touch with a lot of the organization as you grow it, but also not, sort of not be too far because you're having to be in the details of something that you're probably not the best person to go run or lead or do anything with.
And that's in the business. So what about on the business? And maybe the next theme is around investment. So you did decide to go down that venture-backed route. You brought on, I think, Index most recently, Insight Partners, Point Nine. How did you think about raising the right amount of resource that you needed for that period of the business?
Yeah, so our fundraising journey was sort of, a seed round with Index and Point Nine, then Series A with Index, and then a Series B with Insight. And that was over the space of 4 years, I think. Yes, a little over 4 years. But fundamentally, like, it shouldn't be news to anyone, but like taking venture capital is a social contract to grow the business as fast as humanly possible. And like, just know that is true. And, the moment that you sort of try to fight that, you will be in this sort of tension mechanic, which is like, we're going to raise big round, but we'll probably just like try and grow by 50% this year, keep things lean, and we'll see how things go next year. It's not that you can't do that, but it is probably that you will have broken the social contract that you kind of implicitly agreed to do. And the things that led us to raise venture capital was, a bit of the like prisoner's dilemma, which is, well, we've built a thing. People seem to really like it. we think that there's lots of other people in the world that will like this product, and there's lots more stuff that we want to build. But what stops someone that like is sort of just as good as us, doing roughly the same thing, raising sort of, $50 million and just like hiring a lot more people and building it a lot faster. And as a result, it's like we felt the payoff was worth it. And we knew so many people that we would have been unable to hire had we not kind of raised capital. So we felt like the payoff was worth it, the market was worth it, and like we'd be able to, money would let us go do like a lot more useful, high impact, high ROI things. And we just didn't care honestly that much about the sort of lifestyle implications of like running our own business and like, oh, this thing will only need 2 days a week of work so I can be in the Bahamas for the other 5 days of it. It's like we didn't really care about that. We just wanted to work and, build stuff we were proud of with people we were proud to work with. And as a result, like, we wanted to go raise money and fund things. In terms of like the kind of quantum and the amount to raise at each phase, we honestly just like didn't think too hard about it. I would say our strategy on the whole has been raise more money than you think, because like when things go wrong, it's very, very helpful to have more options to play. Basically just like batten down the hatches and like, for example, zero interest rates, or like stuff like, the recovery from zero interest rates to quite high relative interest rates mean that, funding dries up. Let's say OpenAI goes bust next week, or like, some like big shock that happens in the industry. Capital is just the thing that allows you to sort of navigate and to weather that stuff. So we always tended to raise a little bit more than I think the average company may have at that point, but it wasn't like it was just, hey, well, it's available and we like the people that we work with, so, let's do that. And then I think we were sort of very intentional about who we chose to work with, which I think is honestly a bit, it's like we've raised about $100 million at this point. Like, does it matter if we raised $130 million from someone that we didn't want to work with? It's like, I wouldn't take that trade any day. I would choose less money with better people around the company. And ultimately, like, if you were to think about things like dilution as you raise, I just think that in reality, again, the social contract is like the payoff. You're not trying to build $1 billion company with VC. You're trying to build 10 billion, $50 billion companies. Like, look at the Datadogs of the world, look at the CrowdStrikes, like look at look at all these companies that have grown. And fundamentally, like the difference between doing a 12% dilution round versus a 14% dilution round is just like, it's just micro optimizations. It's like, do you want to work with someone great that will help you build the company? Especially in the early days. So my strategy, like all my advice would generally be, choose a great partner first, raise a good amount of money at a sensible valuation that doesn't, create problems for you later down the line, and then get back to building and, basically build a business so good that people turn up and want to give you money, versus you thinking about fundraising every single minute of the day, some like external validation of your company. I mean, it's like, we did fundraising announcements and you sort of end up doing them because other people care a lot about them.
Sure.
But like, I fundamentally don't care very much about, like, it is not the validation of the company you've built that I think the industry projects it to be. Versus things that are much more validating, is like an amazing hire choosing to join your company, or the next biggest deal that you sign, or like, customers raving about it. And that sounds very like, sort of founder woo-woo stuff, but like, it's just like it matters, it's necessary, it's fuel for the business, but it is not like anything like the be all and end all, because, we raised our Series B 3 months ago and like no one's talking about it anymore, versus we work with people like Netflix, and having that partnership with Netflix and having them sort of choose to work with us pays off for many, many years. So as a result, I try and focus my time and energy on those sorts of things, not fundraising.
Yeah. And the funds as a means to an end, the end being landing and growing with Netflix, landing and growing with Etsy, for example. Yeah. And I think another decision that you guys made consciously from the start is you were very bullish on getting into North America as quickly as you possibly could. And that's where I think most of your customers are today, but companies still headquartered in London. How did you think about that?
the way I would think of us is like dual headquartered in London and San Francisco. So about half the companies in the US, about the half is in the UK at this point. Um, and I'd say like usually like the default strategy for European companies is build like Fortress Europe, and then they build a strong enough business that then means that they can choose to sort of push their way into the US. And by push, I mean there's no real demand, but they're going to try and build a product that gets product market fit there. I think that is tough. So for example, like I worked at Halo, which was an Uber competitor back in the day. They'd sort of taken a similar strategy of like sort of start in London, build a great business there, and then go in. That was tough. Uber were already there, Lyft, well funded, different proposals as well. So like we were mostly working with like yellow cab drivers versus they were working with, UberX and building all that stuff out. Then same with Monzo. So Monzo was then kind of built an amazing UK business, but then was trying to build a US business. And it was the build it from scratch versus, build an entirely new thing from scratch. And those sort of haven't succeeded to the level of their original European businesses. This was quite different for us because ever since we started the company, we were sort of global from day one in that, of our first 5 customers, I think 2 were from the US, 2 were from people we knew, and then 1 was European. So it was like, okay, I guess we're doing this thing, and what that meant is, from then until now, about, 3/4 of the customers and the revenue has come from the US. And that's primarily because we sell to companies where running technology and the uptime and resilience of that technology is important to them. And that usually just tends to be like enterprise software plus startup, like high growth technology companies. And as a result, there's just a disproportionate amount of them in the US. So that's where the market is. And we got traction with them early days. So we then built the business out of the UK for about a year at that point. And then we then ended up taking the decision that I would move to New York. And we just stayed up late selling to San Francisco and, doing what we needed to do to keep the business going. I then moved to New York and ended up building kind of go-to-market out of the US. And that looked like hiring people in New York, but also Boston, also San Francisco. And that was, that wasn't without its challenges, but it ultimately meant that we've kind of ended up with this business where like, all of product and R&D is in London. A lot of go-to-market is in the US, but there's still some of that in London. And it's fundamentally based on a like pull-based model, which is like, we're trying to satisfy the demand that is coming to us that we can easily get in that country versus the like, we've built, V.1 of the product. And as a result, we need to go build like an entirely separate new product for the US that's different. So yeah, it's sort of probably really unhelpful, like Captain Obvious advice, but it's like, I would try and build a product that has universal appeal. And like everyone wants to do that, of course. It's actually quite hard to do in like financial, for example, if you're building, I don't know, credit card products, like those products are used very different in the UK versus the US. If you're building enterprise software, I actually think you can probably build a global business from day one. And if you can go there with pull, then that means you can probably more easily get US investors, US talent, US customers, and then it also ends up being this flywheel that you can tend to sort of spin a lot faster. And it's rare that I see companies like push into the US and then immediately kind of get the flywheel going, and then it feels really good. And it can often, I think, to these companies just feel like a very expensive bet, that where the payoff is very worth it, but they're up against like, these sort of Silicon Valley native companies that have all the investors and all of that side of the world. So yeah, it's tough, but I think we've ended up building quite a unique setup in that, like, actually, I think it helped us build more useful muscles in the company, which is like working across many time zones, being able to cross many cultures as we build the company. And then ultimately, it now means that I think we're much more nimble versus, say, one of our US competitors that wants to open up a European office. I think that will be tough for them because they will have to acquire a bunch of muscles that we just spent the last 3 years building. So it's like I don't know, every weakness is your strength in some capacity. It's like, yeah, it's hard to operate across 9 hours, but like if you can operate across 9 hours, that means that there's almost someone always working on the business at the same time. So, ends up being a bit of sort of a blend of strengths and weaknesses.
It reminds me of a point you've made before where you said the pain and the discomfort, the suffering is the moat, because it's only going to be as hard or harder for somebody else that's trying to do the same thing.
It's like a nice little sound bite. I know it's also a bit dramatic for like, enterprise software, I think, compared to what some people go through in the world. But I think ultimately hard problems are sort of worth the reward, or solving hard problems, is disproportionately valuable. So for example, if you think about like hardware startups or something like that, like those are really, really hard problems to solve, but they are like, SpaceX would be like the classic one here, which is incredibly capital intensive. You have to do things that have never been done before, but if you do that, you're playing on a totally different field.
Yeah.
And I think like a good example would be like what we've built with AI SRE. So, for people that don't know what it is an agent that, helps you debug, like diagnose, investigate, and resolve issues that come into your business. So, it's literally like having someone else in the room with you that says, like, I've looked at all of the deploys and code changes that went out in the last 20 minutes. I've scanned all of the dashboards that you have in Datadog. I think it's this thing. And if you do this, it will fix it.
Mhm.
And no surprises, that's a very hard product to build, because you are trying to take things that are very, very challenging for humans to do and then do them in parallel, in a way that is like incredibly accurate and has sort of a trust level that is much higher than a human. And if you do this with the sort of self-driving, single accident in a self-driving car makes the news, many accidents a day with humans driving, just a statistic, and you sort of have to navigate that balance. I think that, but even though it's hard, it will be disproportionately valuable and painful. So as a result, you sort of have to just like get through it, suffer through it. And that might feel like kind of wandering in the desert for a bit and like not making much progress. But it doesn't usually look like this linear path to success. It's usually like ups and downs and valleys, and someone leaves and then, oh yeah, we tried this new thing and then it worked. As long as what you have is not easily just copyable for someone else, like that is differentiation that is different to network effects or like some other more traditional thing. But I still think it counts and is very helpful.
Yeah. Last question from me, Stephen, and then we're going to wrap it up. So let's fast forward, let's say 40 years in the future, and you and I are sat next to each other. Imagine you could actually see the stars in London and there wasn't this like fog over the city.
Yep.
And we look up and I turn to you and I say, Stephen, what was it all for?
I think I'm fundamentally motivated by the act of like building things with people, like creation and creativity.
Mm.
And I said it earlier, but like it's building something I'm proud of with people I'm proud to work with. And like I think, a great example is like, do people not like going through hard times? I actually don't think people mind going through hard times. People can actually quite like going through hard times if they do it with people they like and they trust and, they really, really want to work with. And it's like the sort of war stories, when people in the pub are like, oh, do you remember, a great example is like when SBB like went down, like that was a not great time for the industry, but also for us, in that we had like, quite a bit of our money there. And it was just me, like Pete, Chris, Eva, who, runs legal for us, and Charlie, who was, kind of biz ops, helping us with a bunch of stuff. And it was just us for pretty much 72 hours straight working on this thing. And as a result, it's like, yeah, it was stressful, but like that was a really, really fun weekend in the sort of, we had to navigate and solved, and everything just became crisp as to what like, what the problems were and what we needed to focus on. So I think it is a non-negotiable to me to do both those things, like work you're proud of with people you're proud to work with. If I think about and that's the kind of, outcome irrelevant view of the world, the sort of outcome that we want to go build is that, I think there's a few things that have to line up for people to build like really, really big and defining companies. And it's usually like some technological shift that has happened that means there's opportunities. 10 years ago it was mobile, like now it's AI. You have to have the capital to be able to invest and to go do it. You have to have like a unique point of view and a taste and a difference that allows you to do it. You have to have a great team. I sort of feel like we're in this, it's like I don't know, like all the windows are kind of lining up so you can just see through all of them at the same time. And to me, that is the place that we're in right now. So as a result, it's like it would be criminal for us to not take advantage of the outcome that I feel like we are in the top 5 companies in the world that could go solve this particular problem for companies. And that's a pretty rare position to be in. Like, and all of the work of the past 4 years has got us to a position where we can do that. So I would say it's a combination of, you know, stuff that is innate from like building in creativity and working hard with people that you really trust, but also but the outcome, the ability to build a really, really big company that defines how this problem gets solved, the likelihood of you doing that is not equal over time. And now it feels like we're in a position and a period where like we could actually go do it and not just build a $1 billion company, but build 10 billion, $50 billion company off the back of this. So yes, I think those are the two things that like really, really motivate me. But I think even in 2040, we still won't be able to see the stars in London. So I think it's having to visualize and picture things a little harder.
Can we solve that problem next? I would like to be able to see them.
Yes, I think it would be great. But I mean, I quite like it in the sort of like cyberpunk way. It's like it's never dark in London because you have the moon, but you also have the Leicester Square-esque kind of cloud cover that like beams all the light back down on you. But yes, I mean, we'll see. We'll see what London's like in 20 years.
Steve, thanks so much for the time. It's been some fun.
Pleasure. Really enjoyed it. Thank you.